what about you? What was your journey to prison abolition, or to like calling yourself an abolitionist or talking about these issues? Was it when you started like in law school, or what was that for you?
So how I decided to become a public defender in general was in college. I was writing my thesis called Colored Bodies Matter, Our Relationship Between Bodies and Power. And my thesis advisor, a white woman, Dr. Kathleen Sullivan, whom I love, called me a gap scholar, but in an affectionate way, but it's a term in academia to me, and someone who points out the problems, but they don't necessarily have a solution, which is something that's necessary. And it's very necessary in academia. Like they're not. But I remember thinking it's insufficient for me as a Black person to go become a Black attorney, and in a criminal system where my people are so disproportionately, profiled, incarcerated, and represented in that way, but we make up less than 5% of the legal, their actual legal profession. I felt like it was woefully insufficient for me to not do that. So that's how I became a public defender. But as far as abolition, my thesis advisor, because everything that I was always espousing, she goes, "You sound like you would like abolition." I was like, "What do you mean? Abolish all jails? Like all like and that was as somebody who's literally academically believes devoutly that this criminal system is racist and all of this. But still, when I heard abolition, I was like, then she gave me Our Prisons Obsolete by Angela Davis. And I, just even realizing, hey, it wasn't always like this. Like this prison system, even though you're raised to believe it's like water and air and all that, it's a man-made institution. This massive prison industrial complex, we did not always have this. This is not the norm. I come from a country where we do not police and incarcerate a significant amount of our population, especially based on class and race and all these different kinds of things. And I didn't become an abolitionist overnight, but eventually, and that's kind of to me how I know never to get frustrated in this work, because I can't think of somebody more dogmatic and stubborn than my own self. And the fact that over time you hear something enough because you come to change your worldview, but it's not overnight. And I think sometimes we make the mistake of assuming, like, people will DM me and say, "Hey, I'm going to go debate with my mom or my cousin that's a Republican or something. What thing can I tell them that'll make them really get?" Nothing. You are not going to tell there's nothing you're going to tell any person that is going to make them just completely relinquish their entire worldview. You know what I mean?
Sure.
You could start some cracks in the foundation and it'll erode over time, but it's over time.
People love cops. I mean, juries love cops. People love cops. They buy into a lot of like the copaganda that is just so seamlessly infused into our culture. And you see Black Lives Matter signs on the same, lawns as you'll see Rick Caruso signs. And you're like, in what fucking world do you think a billionaire who's like going to get tough on homelessness isn't just going to unleash more cops to crack people's skulls? Like, I don't understand your worldview. And it is very much a bipartisan, doesn't matter if you're a liberal, conservative, it's money, very much related to money. And in my opinion, very much related to your own personal experiences with law enforcement. Do you feel safe even calling cops? Is your community policed or not? Is your community over policed, right? Has a cop ever arrested your family member? Do you have family in jail currently or in prison currently? And these are all things that disproportionately white people will say, no, I don't have any family members, and I don't see a lot of police in my neighborhood, and I don't feel like I'm in the occupied West Bank, over here.
Right.
Yeah. Which is why it's easy to talk and it's easy to be like, defund the police is bad, but it's very different when you live it. And for me, my experience was, coming up in New York in early 2000s, anti-war activist, global justice activist, and then having friends who were involved in prison abolition work through the organization Critical Resistance, lots of love for them. And I was like, completely abolish this. That seems okay. I'm not quite there. I'm still friends with you guys, and we'll hang, but I wasn't quite there. And over time, and learning about it, and also understanding that is not my lived experience, but I cannot graft my subjective experience onto what is effectively a objectively systemic failed system, right? A racist system that I have not borne the brunt of. And so putting myself there as well.
I mean, to me, there are certain commonsensical principles that I think, get us there eventually. And it's, first of all, we know that the safest communities are not the most police communities. That's just the truth. The safest communities are the most resource communities. All of the communities with the highest police presence are the communities that they deem high crime areas, and they continue to be the high crime areas, the most under resourced, the most impoverished communities, generation after generation. So this is obviously just not what it does. And the second thing is, America puts more money. America puts over $277 billion into policing each year. America puts more money into policing and mass incarceration than anywhere else. And I don't know another country that constantly sensationalizes and fearmongers its own population in the way that America does. It's the reason why so many people, the people that constantly talk to you about feeling afraid, are the same people telling you that all this crime and danger isn't in their communities. They will say, oh, it's only in the Black areas, it's into this. So then what are you afraid of? Why do the police need to be in your neighborhood? You're not the ones who've experienced crime. It's not a mistake, or it's not a coincidence that the actual survivors of crime, the actual people in these communities that experience it, are the ones that are advocates of criminal justice reform, are the ones that are telling you, hey, no, this is actually what we need. Instead of putting money into policing us and incarcerating us, put money into our housing, put money into our education, put money into our healthcare, put money into our infrastructure, so that we can actually alleviate the root causes of crime, because this doesn't do anything and we don't feel safe. And they know that. So for me, it comes to be what is the obvious, sensible conclusion, because at the end of the day, as much as people criticize, abolition or criminal justice reform or any kind of alternative method to policing, they've never done it. You've never tried it. So according to you, the only thing we do is policing and mass incarceration, and it's failing. According to you, its proponents,
One thing I like to think about, and it's similar to that, is and just a parallel I like to draw in my mind is around climate change, right? There's a movement called to keep it in the ground, right? And it's led by indigenous folks around the world who are like, just keep it in the ground, stop exploiting oil, stop extracting, just stop whole cloth. Now, to some folks, that seems really extreme. Obviously, to this administration, they're like, no, we've got to dig a lot more so that eventually we'll get renewables. But right now we got a war in Russia. Let's dig, drill. Yes, Saudi Arabia, please give us more oil. But I think it is not. I think that's a goal. You have to have a vision and you have to have a goal. And like you're saying, your thesis, your professor, who oversees your
Dr. Sullivan, my thesis advisor.
Advisor, your thesis advisor, being like, okay, well, how do we get there? And I think that you can't necessarily take these steps without having like a where are we going? And I think where we're going when it comes to climate is keeping the fossil fuels that are in the earth, because we know they're going to kill us. And where we're going on prisons is abolishing them. But in my mind, yes, a remaking, a revisioning, a re-envisioning, but this system needs to go. And this system has proven itself. And same with the healthcare system. I believe in Medicare for all. I don't believe in reform because I don't believe Kaiser, fucking Blue Shield, and these private insurance companies give a shit about reform. They don't want to reform. You cannot reform this system. You have to abolish the private healthcare system. You have to abolish the prison system, in my view. So these are the visions. And so I equate those. I think folks somehow are more allergic to that idea when it comes to criminal justice or the legal system than they are to when they talk about the climate or when they talk about healthcare, But these are all systems that are broken. So we need to see them, similarly.
Absolutely we do.
Anyway, anything else? I mean, we could talk for a while about this, but I guess, are there shining examples for you? I'm thinking of West Hollywood, which is funny, and we talked about it on this show because O.J. Simpson, of all people, was like, West Hollywood's defunding the police, and that is wrong. But West Hollywood basically moved, I believe they took out 2 sheriffs and use that money to employ, I think, 10 mental health workers in that neighborhood, which is huge. And I'm like, oh, how did 2 sheriff salaries pay for 10 people? Yeah, because we overpay these cops. And
the cops make more than the public defender. Correct. The literally just the court staff, the court officers make more than the public defenders, and that is also not an accident, right? Like the underfunding, the Think about it like this. We have a criminal system. Public defenders are the only constitutionally mandated attorneys, right? That poor people need to be represented by somebody. And the vast majority of everyone in our criminal system is represented by a public defender. So that tells you something about the exact population we're policing, because to qualify for my services, you have to be beneath the poverty line. And that's virtually everybody in court. And then if you take those attorneys that have to represent the bulk of everyone in the system and you pay them less than everybody, what kind of representation do those people get? You know what I mean? What are they able to do? And that keeps the system churning in this way. It's why everything has to be pled out. It's why everything, people sit in jail. They stack it in this way on purpose.
One thing I think people need to also remember is we talk about private prisons, and you might know the stat specifically, but yes, private prisons are awful. No one should be making money off of, someone who's incarcerated. And especially when you look at the immigration detention systems, that is, it's disproportionately high. But in terms of overall, it's a small percentage of the number of prisons and jails.
Is a distraction. Private prison is exactly what I referenced earlier when I said the problem with teaching us that the system is ultimately just. And so when we get things, we can focus on the other thing. The private prisons argument was raised as something to be able to distract you from the rest of the prisons being bad. It's so that you can maintain this idea, we need it all. The problem is these private prisons. The problem is that we have these for-profit systems. Public and private prisons in America overall produce over $11.6 billion in goods for America. Just period. $11.6 billion goods, public and private. Rikers is a pretrial detention center. People have not been incarcerated and have not been convicted of a crime. And yet all those people were forced to make all the hand sanitizers that we got in New York City and couldn't get it. We're not allowed to use it themselves, couldn't socially distance, but that's who make it. In America, there's a reason why I say we have to start calling things what they are and not using these euphemisms that are intentionally meant to play it down. Instead of saying, mass incarceration is a new slavery. It's just slavery. If slavery is a system by which we take people, we strip them of their freedom and their civil liberties, and we make them work for another person's labor, another person's financial gain against their own control, that's what we're doing. America incarcerates 2 million people, 400,000 of which are being held pre-trial. America makes up 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's incarcerated population. The average state pays incarcerated people between 13 and maybe 50 cents for all labor, but 7 states don't pay them anything altogether, completely drop the pretense. And then these people are also stripped of their right to vote in most places. And then after that, in terms of fines and fees, because people say, they did the crime, they did the time. And they don't realize that all these people, which we've already recognized, are poor people. They're living beneath the poverty line, are not just being incarcerated, but they're being charged fines and fees. The same court that recognized that they have no money, that's why they have a public defender. It's the same court that's going to set bail on them after just acknowledging they have no money, and then hit them with all kinds of fines and fees for the criminal conviction that they're going to force them to have to take, because otherwise they're going to have to sit in pretrial detention for for however long. So it is deliberately set up to like that, because it is slavery. That's what it is.
Right. Absolutely. You also, there's the new Jim Crow that you kind of referenced, although you're arguing it is just Jim Crow.
Yeah.
And also, sorry, Angela Davis's book that I'm now blanking on.
Our prison's obsolete.
Our prison's obsolete. Thank you. And also, everyone, just watch The Wire if you don't understand how any of this works. Just fucking watch the show The Wire. But we've got a comment, and I just, because we maybe didn't finish the envisioning, but Hal Wasserman on YouTube says, I still don't understand what the alternative to prison is. For you, what does that look like? And are we there even yet at that stage of thinking of that?
So abolition is a vision of tomorrow, right? Like we are aware that they're not going to go and close all the courts and shut all the jails down and open all the cells tomorrow. But it's this idea that instead of continuing to invest in mass incarceration, we need to take that money that we've put into policing, that we've put into prisons, and instead give it to these under-resourced communities to actually alleviate the issues and the social ills that they are struggling with. Because the reality is, as much as people would like to pretend it's something else and pretend it's just all these bad people, all the poor people are just bad, it's not true. All right. The majority of everything in our criminal system are crimes of poverty. So instead of making the policy decision to continue criminalizing these people, instead, let's actually alleviate the needs for this. And eventually we will do away with the need for prisons, because the reality is lots of places, America is not America's mass incarceration is not normal. It's not the usual thing that everybody lives in. You know, I'm from a country where we do not, the average Black man between 18 and 29 years old in America will have experienced being arrested or incarcerated at some point in time. That's crazy. That is absolutely crazy. And that is not a normal thing for other places, right? Or even when you look at California had maybe 9 prisons for like 100 years. And then suddenly they made an executive decision at the, get Nixon, get Reagan, get these people, boom, hundreds of prison constructions, So that's what happens. They create these structures and they fill them, but they're policy choices, right? We didn't always incarcerate for these things. We didn't always do it this way, but we're choosing to do it because that is a system that we're maintaining. So it's about divesting from it and modeling other methods. There are lots of countries that actively make a policy choice to have prisons be rehabilitative. And that's often people will point to places like Denmark and all of this, but what's also important to note there is they have white population, you know what I mean? In places where there is there's the congruity of that white population. Yeah, I'm gonna give you a certain kind of care, but in our criminal system where we police particular populations, we opt to have a system that we know is strife with abuse and strife with struggle. So we've just modeled the rest of the world that is not following this barbaric system.
Totally. And it is part and parcel of our unique history, of slavery. And this is we are descendants of that original crime that still has not been rectified. And so here we are again still. But I think that basically and similarly, it is divestment, it is defunding, it is moving money out of it. That shit just doesn't fit on a little slogan, And I think it is important to know that these conversations, they're not made for CNN necessarily, but the beginnings of them can be. And I think that's what is really great. And the moving of the money and if we stop, if we actually invest in communities, if we actually don't further criminalize poverty, let's just try moving money in different places and see what happens. Just as a joke, just as a little gag, a little gag. Let's do it for 5 years. And if it's still good, we'll do it for 10. And then if after 10, it's all bad, we'll be like, you know what? Let's go back to incarcerating everybody, over policing. My bad. Fucking George Zimmerman and Kyle Rittenhouse can, we'll hold them up as deities. And y'all win. You know what I mean? Other people win. But let's just just give us 5 years. Give us 10 years.
I have a piece coming out soon in a week or two for Teen Vogue about this called Mass Incarceration is Insane. And it's basically that's because it is, right? They're and if insanity is doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting, different results, that's what this is for us to constantly, it's interesting. Whenever what you want to do is something new from the method they are insisting, according to its proponents, is failing, right? If crime is apparently so hysterical, but we continue to put more money and expand this system. Whenever, you want to do something else, here's all the hysteria, but you have no problem continuing to mass incarcerate entire populations in specific communities, despite the fact that it's done nothing to alleviate the conditions of those communities or the crime that those communities are the ones that you say experience it. Because again, white people and all these people that are the leaders of mass incarceration, its biggest cheerleaders, are the main people telling you they have no actual skin in the game. They have no lived experiences with it. So
yeah. Absolutely. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And that's exactly what we're doing on all of these fronts. But Olayemi, I appreciate your clarity, your lucidity, your ability to sort of cut through and kind of go into the fray in a lot of ways. It's a lot of work that you already are doing as your job, but this is a whole other, and the fact that you being on the Breakfast Club, which you were, the fact that you're on those shows is progress and is cool as hell.
Yes.
And you know what? And if it breaks through a little bit, even if a seed is planted, then that's good. What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/Bitchuation Room. Do it.